Hey, so from the title, you know I'm going to be reviewing another sword here today, but I wanted to kind of address the overarching theme of my presentations. You'll notice that I'm mostly reviewing some lower end, less expensive products, still good quality, which is kind of the way I operate. I'm not the kind of person who's going to go out and buy a $2,000 or more sword. Just like I'm not going to go out there and buy a $4,000 gun or something like that necessarily. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One, I'm not that rich. And two, something that's really high quality, high craftsmanship, expensive materials that has a lot of like posterity value to it, whether it's new or an antique, I'd be afraid to use it and dig it up. I'm not the kind of guy who's going to buy something like that and stick it on a shelf or in a case. I buy these things to use them. And because of that, some of you are going to consider that I make some pretty questionable choices. And this includes with antiques. I have a couple of antique Nihonto, some Gunto from World War II that were handmade. And when I show them in another video, some of you sword snobs and antiques lovers are going to have absolute heart attacks seeing what I did to them in terms of refinishing and refitting them. In the antiques community, there's this argument of whether it's better to have the old rust or the new polish. I'm going to pick the new polish because I intend to use the thing. So I'm going to refinish, refit, change out bad parts. I'm going to make the thing usable for me. Like I said, I do the same thing with my guns. I'm going to use them for their intended purposes, and in this case with swords, for me, that's martial arts practice, which includes some cutting and a lot of handling. They're going to get a lot of use. Now, I kind of dissed my my Kawashima katana in another video, but I want to point out that I didn't spend a lot on that, so it falls into that category. I was a little disappointed with it because it said it was a 1095 clay tempered, and yes, I did check the certificate in the box. It says it's clay tempered. It clearly isn't, probably isn't 1095, and it certainly wasn't Japanese made. And from some recent discussions I've had, I think at the time, 12, 15 years ago, this upstart Chinese forge, claimed Japanese manufacture to make the sword snobs happy, because there are people out there that say if it's not Japanese made, well, it's not a katana. They'll certainly say it's not a Nihonto, because by definition that would be true, but it's not even a katana if it's not Japanese made. Well, good luck getting somebody from Japan to make you a sword that costs less than a car, and you don't have to spend years waiting for them to make it. And again, that's not something I'm going to buy, not just for the money, but I'd be afraid to touch it when I got it, because I intend to use it and slightly abuse it. And the Kawashima, it's been through hell with me. It's been a primary practice sword for, like I said, about a dozen years. It's done just fine. I've had to repair the edge and a lot of scratches on it because it's softer than it should be, but otherwise, once I made sure that pommel wasn't going to fall off anymore, it's been a good, comfortable, usable sword, so I don't consider that a bad investment. When it comes to new swords, the same kind of thing. I'm going to take a chance on a new upstart forge. Once I've worked with a forge for a while, I kind of know their product. I'm pretty confident in what I'm going to get each time. But I'm not necessarily going to go for their higher end stuff off the bat. I'm going to roll the dice on the cheaper stuff, and my thought is, if it's bad, maybe there's parts of it I can use and I can recycle it, or maybe I can turn it into something else because I'm crafty like that, or maybe it's just going to be a part sword. Anyway, I'm not out a lot of money, so that's not a big cost. And a lot of the time, I'm pretty darn impressed by what I'm getting. So most of my dice rolls work out just fine. And this is an example of that. This particular sword is made by Eriton, which is another one of those Chinese forges. And it's supposed to be a copy of a Type 98 Shin Gunto from World War II. And it's kind of that, and it's kind of not. Talking about rolling the dice. I will post a picture of how this came to me. This is not what it originally looked like, by the way. Just so you can kind of see what I received and what I took a chance on. And the biggest glaring difference is the wrap. It came wrapped in what was supposed to be leather and wasn't. It was really this really cheap, horrible, fake plastic that was slippery and ugly, and it was so bad it actually squeaked. when you grabbed it, and the scabbard was wrapped in that too. So first chance I got rid of that, and I initially replaced it with the cheapest thing I can find, which was a synthetic Ito, also off everybody's favorite site for buying cheap stuff and having it delivered to your door in 2020. And I'll post some pictures of that too, because it was an improvement, but I couldn't live with it because the synthetic Ito was stretchy. And it was so stretchy that it didn't make good diamonds. And even when I struggled to get a good diamond, it would fray easily, and those diamonds would move around as soon as you picked it up. So it was a lot grippier and a lot more comfortable, and just for straight up practice and abuse, it would have been fine, but I wasn't content with it, so I invested a whole $2 more, and bought a slightly more expensive suede wrapping. And this is in a nice red claret shade, which is actually a nice deep red. And I have some suede wrapping on one of my Hanweis that I'll show in a different video. And I really like it. And I actually like real leather wrapping. Real leather wrapping is good, and it's sturdy, and it's weatherproof, and it doesn't move around. It takes a lot of abuse. But the fake stuff, yeah, is awful, and I get rid of it as soon as I can. So this turned out a lot better, feels better. Other things that were a mixed bag. The fixtures, they kind of look a lot like the real Shin Gunto that I have, and the dimensions are close, and that's one of the reasons why I got it. My first Shinken, my first Nihonto back in 1980 were Shin Gunto, and I'm used to that shape of sword more than I am a katana in many ways. I've had a lot more hours and years of practice behind a gunto than I have behind a katana. So I really just wanted something that would be a good analog for it. So I could semi-retire my old ones, so they wouldn't be in the abusive rotation anymore, and they'd get a little bit more longevity. And I'd have something that I could use for some of the heavier practice work and that sort of thing. And this seemed to fit the bill. And it wasn't expensive. I spent like $200 and change on the thing, so I figured it was worth the roll of the dice. And it was. Also, when it came to me, the fixtures were kind of a dull brass finish, and I was worried that they would be totally cheap castings. And they are thinner than real Gunto castings. They're not as heavy duty. But once they were polished, they have a nice brass finish. So I was pleased with that. Also, the same underneath the wrapping is real. It's a medium-small node. So not the best, but not the worst. And it is panels. It's not a full wrap, but for what I paid for it, I didn't expect a full wrap. Let's talk about some of the problems. The biggest glaring problem, once I got past the plastic awful wrapping on it, was the Kashira. It's still a little bit loose, but when I got it, it's not fit to the end of the suka at all. There's a massive amount of room between that fixture and the wood underneath it. So it was just barely hanging on. Also, what you'll see now is that the Ito I put on there, I drilled out the suka and I wrapped the Ito through the pommel, which is how it's supposed to be, so that the wrapping helps hold on that Kashira. But in the initial sword, it wasn't there. The plastic wrapping just ended before the pommel and just tied off and sat there. There was nothing holding the pommel on except the sarute, the lanyard loop, which was originally a really cheap, thin casting that almost immediately broke, and then nothing was holding the pommel on. So I found a little grommet in my scrap parts that fit it, and I remade myself a lanyard loop, a sarute out of steel from scratch, which is actually authentic to period. You'll find a lot of Gunto that have replacement lanyard loops that are not pretty. They're just basically, steel wire. And I made myself a tassel for it. It's not authentic, but, whatever. It's kind of close. Like I said, I'm looking for an analog, not the real thing, for the sake of practice. So yeah, that's a lot better now, but still it probably needs a little bit more filler and a little bit more work to be perfect. But the rest of the sword is actually put together really solid. The balance is good, the feel is good, and I'll get into that after we take a look at the scabbard. Again, the fixtures on the scabbard are reasonably authentic to a Gunto. Not quite as well made. Obviously, they are copies and castings. The scabbard itself is kind of a rosewood. It's not very finished at all. It's not lacquered or anything. It might have a little bit of an oil finish, which makes me worried about its ability to hold up to moisture. Original Gunto, you'll notice this is kind of a thin scabbard, which is authentic to a real gunto, but the real ones, most of them are clad in metal. The core is wood, but the outside is metal, which makes it, suitable for the battlefield, and it's something I really appreciate. Other changes and problems with it, the fit of the habaki to the scabbard was stupidly tight, and you'd actually have to pry the thing out. So that took a lot of adjustment, and it's still a bit sticky, and part of that is the materials that I'll get into. But another thing about it is I have to be really careful about resheathing it, because it's not cut right inside, and it will hang up, especially with how sharp this blade is, which you'll see in a second. So yeah, it likes to hang up. If anybody knows how to get in there and reshape that saya without splitting it and taking it apart, this one actually would be easy to just take the fixtures off and split in half and then clean up and put it back together and refinish it. But, I like shortcuts. So if anybody knows of, how to make a tool or find a tool that you can use to reshape that without having to take the scabbard apart, I would appreciate somebody mentioning that to me in the comments or whatever. One more thing about the scabbard, which is kind of odd. The Koiguchi, the scabbard mouth, it has a little notch in it for a traditional Type 98 latch scabbard lock, but there's not one on the sword. Nor is the sword cut for one. There should be a little slot through the seppa and the suba, and there should be a hole in the fuchi for a little button, and then there'd be a latch that sticks through that sticks the sword in the scabbard and doesn't let it come free unless you push the button, like my real ones. Now, on my real ones, the reason why I'm not upset about this, because on my real ones, I took them out because they were in the way of my grip and handling. So yes, I removed them and plugged the holes. Again, some of you antique Nihonto enthusiasts are going to hate me for that. But again, I want a weapon I can use for the way I'm going to use it, and that's for practical use. Moving on from the scabbard. Oh yeah, one last thing. The sword stinks. Not quality. I mean, it literally stinks. Whatever they packed it in. A lot of forges, what they'll do is they'll coat the sword in some kind of thick oil for storage and shipping, and then they'll wrap it in plastic before they put it in the scabbard. They didn't do that well with this one. So whatever they greased it in, which smells worse than kerosene, it really lights up your sinuses, is saturated into the wood of the scabbard. So I may have to take it apart just to try to clean that stuff and strip that out eventually. But yeah, so when I say the sword stinks, I mean it smells bad. The blade does not stink, not at all. As a matter of fact, for the money, like I said, I spent about 200 and change on this thing. I got more than my money's worth. Balance, proportions, length, you got about a 10-inch handle, you got about a 27-inch blade, 27.5-inch blade. It's got a little bit less curve than a real Shin Gunto. It's a little bit closer to a katana that way, but not quite. But the blade is just wonderful. Looking down it, the planes are all even. There's no rippling. It is a standard Shinogi Zukiri profile with the peak spine. It's kind of a little bit wider than some katana and slightly thinner in profile, which makes it excellent for cutting. And it is extremely sharp. Going up to the tip, the kasaki, it's medium and it's very well formed, and there's a good pronounced geometric yokote, that transition line. The hamon, the temper line, is not going to show up very well on here. I notice usually the periphery of my lighting here tends to show it better than the middle. But the hamon is gorgeous. It's a nice wave hamon, and then also the hada, the grain line, is exquisite, because this is a Damascus blade. For $200 and change, I got a Damascus blade. It is made out of a combination of 1095 and 1060 high carbon steel, which give it really good edge holding, edge retention. That thing is like a razor, and it's held its edge really well, and it's been pretty scuff resistant in cutting. And it's also resilient. It's got a decent amount of flex and resiliency, so I'm not worried about it breaking. There are no massive flaws or inclusions or anything in that Damascus pattern. The finish is very well done. And like I said, the weight and the balance is great. So just the blade itself, if I was going to throw out the rest of the sword and just keep the blade, it would be worth my money and I would be happy with it. So yes, I am actually very happy I rolled the dice on this one, and it certainly encourages me to continue doing so in the future. So you may see some other random reviews for what most people would consider, lower end garbage katana, but they're really not. I mean, I've done those other videos where I've talked about what we had to put up with in the 70s and 80s and even into the 90s in terms of trying to find a real sword that was decent, that wasn't an antique Japanese, World War II war prize or something like that. But, thankfully I was able to find some of those to have some real swords to work with. But it was a long time before we had anything decent, and those things started showing up in this century, in the aughts and the teens. And what we have today, what's coming out of those Chinese forges, you can be as snobby as you want about, authentic Japanese-made swords, or even, some of the American smiths that really put a lot of work into the sword, and then they'll sell it to you for, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, or more than that. That's great if that's your thing, but my thing is a tool I can use, and a tool that's good quality. So I'm going to kind of keep on keeping on in that sense. And I hope you found this informative, or at least entertaining, and I hope to see you again.